Coral sand beaches, coconut palms gently swaying in the ocean breeze, waterfalls, rainbows. Hawaii is all these things and many more. In fact, Hawaii has a deep, dark little secret, a secret the US government wouldn't like you to know about.
Have you ever wondered why Hawaii is a part of America? After all, it's 2,000 miles from the American mainland. Native Hawaiian people definitely don't look like Americans in any way, shape, or form, and Native Hawaiians have their own culture, cuisine, and language that is completely different from Western culture. So why is Hawaii a part of America? Well, the answer is it was never supposed to be. Hawaii had its own government, its own laws, its own economy, and the locals had laid claim to the islands for more than 1,000 years. But then came the Americans, the missionaries who wanted to spread the word of God. These missionaries would soon realize just how profitable sugar farming could be on Hawaii. So they encroached ever so slowly on the Native Hawaiians, taking their land, their culture, their dignity, their spirit away from them, inch by inch over the decades. And ever so slowly, these Americans gradually beat the Hawaiians into submission, all the way until Hawaii was officially recognized as the 50th state of the US in 1959. See, to put it bluntly, Hawaii was stolen in every sense of the word. Their land stripped from them, their power stripped from them, their leaders toppled, seized by Americans in the name of chasing the mighty dollar.
The establishment of large sugar plantations was kind of the colonial force that really pulled these islands into the chains of global capital agricultural production and left behind the legacy of consolidated land ownership, control over water rights, and really the disenfranchisement and marginalizations of indigenous people in their homelands.
The bottom line, all the way until today, where on the surface, Hawaii looks like a tropical paradise, a top-tier destination any tourist will want to visit. But if you look a little deeper, this island that was once the home to an indigenous population is almost entirely owned by just 82 landholders. We're talking about 95% of Hawaii's land being owned by just 82 landholders by 2015. More than half of that land belongs to a government the people didn't choose, and the rest, it is in the hands of the sugar and pineapple companies that control the islands. My name is Jake Tran. I make documentaries on money, power, war, and crime with my team. Subscribe for more. If you want to win $1,000 cash, you just have to be following me at Jake Tran and you're automatically entered. A few of you have won already. Watch out for fake accounts. I will never message you asking for money. And this is how the US stole Hawaii. If you're watching this channel right now, you probably want to be really successful one day. And yeah, that's gonna take a lot of hard work. But being successful isn't just about always grinding. In fact, most successful people know that 90% of this game is mental. And a big part of becoming successful is working through all the mental issues, childhood trauma, and relationship issues that we're all plagued with, including myself. And the truth is, the best way to deal with all of this is with a therapist. Looking back, I really wish someone would have pushed me to do therapy sooner. I used to be super awkward because of all my insecurities and childhood trauma, and I could have gotten over that way sooner and easier if I had a little help. I would have been happier sooner, I wouldn't have wasted so many years, and I would have been more successful sooner. But the problem is finding a therapist in your area is difficult and expensive. But not anymore, because that's where today's video sponsor BetterHelp comes in. BetterHelp is democratizing therapy. They're the largest therapy platform in the world with over 2 million users. It isn't a crisis line or self-help, it's professional therapy all done securely online. With BetterHelp, you'll have access to over 20,000 licensed and vetted therapists all online. And getting started is super easy. Just give BetterHelp a little information about yourself and what kind of therapy you're looking for. Then based on your needs, BetterHelp matches you with a therapist who is the best fit for you. And boom, that is it. You can start communicating with your therapist in as little as 48 hours, and once you're matched, you can send them a message whenever you want. You can set up weekly video or phone calls with your therapist, so you can avoid the awkwardness of in-person meetings. And if you're not feeling your therapist, it's simple and free to switch to a new one. BetterHelp is more affordable than traditional therapy, and financial aid is available. So take control of your future today by pausing the video and heading over to betterhelp.com/JakeTran for 10% off your first month. That's betterhelp.com/JakeTran for 10% off your first month. Thanks to BetterHelp for sponsoring this video.
More than 1,000 years ago, a group of Polynesian settlers arrived on the Hawaiian Islands. These settlers lived without any real government for 700 years because their cultures never really needed one. And then by 1778, James Cook arrived. He was the first European to ever lay foot on the islands. And understandably, the native Hawaiians were pretty freaked out by these people who carried guns and acted like they owned the place. Long story short, Captain Cook and his sailors spent a few weeks on the islands and ended up giving the people dozens of Western diseases that wiped out more than half of the population. Then, on his second visit, Cook was mistaken for a Polynesian god, told his sailors to steal wood from a sacred Hawaiian burial ground, tried to kidnap one of their kings, and got himself killed because of it. Not exactly a great start to Hawaiian-Western relations. But more importantly, Cook's visits had put Hawaii on the map. Even after hearing about the captain's gruesome death, European and American sailors couldn't help themselves. The allure of Hawaii's tropical landscape, natural harbors, and the chance to restock supplies were just too great. So after Captain James Cook's first visit to Hawaii in 1778, the islands would never be the same again. Now it was time for Americans to take their chances on the Hawaiian Islands. But it wasn't just any Americans. They were American missionaries. Way back in the 18th century, most Christians believed it was their God-given duty to travel around the world, teaching the heathens and barbarians, as they like to call them, about the only true religion. And Hawaii was no exception. You see, Polynesian religion was nothing like Christianity. Hawaiians believed in many different gods, and that just made the Christian missionaries more determined to prove them wrong. The only problem was, these missionaries didn't just want to spread their religion, they wanted to force it onto people. Better yet, they wanted to completely change Hawaiian society to follow Western culture. So, when boatloads of American missionaries arrived carrying guns and telling the Hawaiian people that singing, dancing, and games were suddenly illegal, they didn't have much choice but to accept that this was the new normal. Then, in the mid-1800s, the missionaries decided to make an even bigger change. This time, they thought Hawaii would be easier to control if it had one king instead of many chiefs and elders. One guy that could tell what to do, and the Hawaiian people would just have to nod and agree. So the missionaries installed a puppet king to rule Hawaii and forever changed the landscape of a power on the island. Whether or not Hawaiian people agreed to this change was irrelevant. But hey, at least the Kingdom of Hawaii, as it was now called, still had its independence, and that was a pretty big deal. You see, by the late 1800s, there were only 44 completely independent countries in the world, and Hawaii was one of them. Today, there are 197. That meant, by 19th century standards, Hawaii was pretty special. It wasn't a colony, it wasn't a territory, it was a kingdom. It didn't have to answer to anyone except its own king. But as you can guess, that wouldn't last long. Being a missionary and preaching the word of God on a tiny group of islands didn't exactly pay well. These American missionaries were dead broke in Hawaii, and that was becoming a problem. Forget laying up their treasures in heaven. They wanted a little more real material benefit from all that good news and gospel they were spreading. But unlike mainland America, Hawaii didn't have any gold, it didn't have any oil, and it didn't have any diamonds. But what Hawaii did have was sugarcane. And that's where the missionaries struck sweet, white, powdery gold. Sugar. By the 1830s, the Industrial Revolution had spread to America, which meant mass production of white sugar was just another incredibly lucrative business. And the missionaries wanted in. So they teamed up with the not-so-religious American farmers and together made a plan to turn Hawaiian land into the most profitable sugar plantations ever. There was just one problem. None of the land in Hawaii was for sale. In traditional Hawaiian culture, the idea of owning land didn't exist. Plus, American paper money meant nothing to the native Hawaiians, and without some sort of ownership deal, the sugarcane the Americans grew could easily be harvested by pretty much anyone on the island. Not a great business plan. Luckily, that's where the missionaries' friendly little puppet king came in, the guy the missionaries had put in charge of all of Hawaii. He was easily convinced to create new land reforms that basically cut up Hawaiian land and put it under the direct control of the king. Now, if any Westerners wanted land, they could just buy it from the king. Simple. The only problem was, none of this made any sense to native Hawaiians who had been living on shared land for almost 1,000 years. And even if they wanted to buy land, they couldn't because they had no money. The only people with any of this real money the king wanted were the Americans. And so, the American farmers and missionaries arbitrarily created a monopoly on land that was never supposed to be sold in the first place. From there, it was nowhere but up for these humble missionaries and their patriotic farmer friends. They were planting sugarcane on every piece of land they could get their hands on. They were harvesting boatloads of sugarcane, ready to export to America. There was just one more issue: import levies. The taxes America charged for goods like sugar coming into the US from another country. Hawaii, after all, wasn't a part of America yet at this point, and that's where the real trouble for Hawaii started. For decades before Hawaii became a sugar exporter, America had placed heavy tariffs, or taxes, on imported sugar. That's because the US had its own sugar monopoly to deal with. Basically, a small group of American sugar farm owners had gotten together and forced the American government to put massive taxes on any foreign sugar coming into America. That way, the local farmers could set their sugar prices as high as they liked, without any competition to drive them back down. It was a cookie-cutter monopoly, and a massive problem for American farmers in Hawaii. These giant import tariffs were cutting into their profits. Something had to be done. So in 1854, under pressure from the American farmers, the puppet king of Hawaii made America an offer it couldn't refuse. Reduce tariffs on Hawaiian sugar to zero, and we'll give you exclusive rights to opening commercial and military bases on our islands. To be clear, no native Hawaiians wanted any of this. They didn't want to exchange their land so the American farmers could get rich. And they were worried that exchanging a few pieces of land for zero tariffs will lead to all of Hawaii falling under American control someday. But in 1876, the agreement became official. Import taxes on Hawaiian sugar went to zero, and Americans could build on the islands of Hawaii. America had its foot in the door. The number of Hawaiian sugar farms tripled, and the American farmers were making bank. But didn't end there. You see, the agreement was supposed to last for 8 years, after which it could be renewed. But when the 8th year came around, America decided it didn't really like the terms of this already great deal. Exclusive land rights didn't seem like enough in exchange for zero tariffs. On top of that, mainland American sugar farmers were not happy. They now had all this competition from Hawaiian sugar. They had lost their monopoly, and they politely voiced their concerns to the American government. So, just like a landlord who takes every chance to increase rent, America decided to strong-arm for more. This time, America wanted all those exclusive land rights, plus control of Pearl Harbor. By now, Pearl Harbor had become one of the most important strategic points in the Pacific Ocean, and America wanted it for itself. Unsurprisingly, the king agreed. After all, giving in to the Americans wasn't just an option anymore, it was an obligation. Drunk on power, the American farmers quickly saw their chance to force the Hawaiian king to hand over even more control of his country. So in 1887, a new Hawaiian constitution was introduced. Except this time, it was written by American lawyers and farmers. And the king? He was forced to sign it at gunpoint. What was the biggest change in this new constitution? Only landowners could be allowed to vote or run for office. It didn't matter that most native Hawaiians still didn't own land. It also didn't matter that most landowners were white Americans. Under the new constitution, native Hawaiians lost any say they had in the destiny of their country. The king had signed away his people's rights and independence. By now, Hawaii was practically a de facto US territory. Only a miracle could save Hawaii now. And that miracle came in the form of Queen Liliuokalani. In 1891, the king of Hawaii died, and his sister, Princess Liliuokalani, became queen. Unlike her brother, Queen Liliuokalani wasn't okay with American farmers running the country, and she spent the next 2 years trying to give Hawaii its independence back. Around the same time, the American sugar farmers ran into another problem, the McKinley Act. Basically, this act removed the tariffs on all sugar imports to America. Now sugar farmers from Jamaica to Nicaragua could ship their sugar to America without any hefty fees. The huge advantage Hawaiian sugar farmers once had was now gone. To keep local American sugar growers happy, the government agreed to pay farmers an extra 2 cents per pound for locally grown sugar. But the Hawaiian sugar farmers, they were back at square one. And this time, no treaty or agreement could save them. The only way they could maintain their edge and keep their coffers full was to officially become a part of America. That way, they could also get that juicy 2-cent subsidy per pound of sugar. Now, imagine the horror these farmers experienced when, in the middle of planning to become an official American territory, Queen Liliuokalani comes out of nowhere and announces her plans for a new constitution. A constitution that will give Native Hawaiians back all their power. If this new constitution is put into place, the Americans would be screwed. And for them, the solution became obvious. It was time to overthrow the Hawaiian kingdom once and for all. The plan to overthrow Hawaii's government had been in the works for years, but when the Queen announced her plan for a new constitution, the Americans knew they would have to act fast. Enter John L. Stevens, Lorin Thurston, and Henry E. Cooper, the American minister to Hawaii, an ex-Hawaiian government official, and an American lawyer. The three main conspirators, they called themselves the Committee for Safety, a very inconspicuous name. And together, they planned to overthrow the Hawaiian Queen and officially put Hawaii under American control. January 14th, 1893, Queen Liliuokalani announces her plans for a new constitution, and the Committee for Safety immediately jumps into action. With most of the government consisting of Hawaiian-born Americans, a coup would be relatively easy. The only real problem would be the Queen and her guards. Would they put up a fight? And if they did, would other Native Hawaiians join them? Luckily, an American warship was docked just a few miles ashore, and as the American minister to Hawaii, John Stevens had all the authority in the world to call the soldiers to shore. January 16th, 1893, the minister does exactly that, and 162 American Marines and sailors land on the island with guns drawn and artillery in tow. With this show of strength, three conspirators gather a crowd of American farmers outside the royal palace a day later, with nearly 60 armed American soldiers by their side. And not one person in the Queen's government could or wanted to help her. After decades of handing power over to America, there were no patriotic Hawaiians left in office. Defeat is inevitable. And to add insult to injury, Henry Cooper, the American lawyer that helped plan the coup, announced the Queen was officially removed from power without her ever having one word or say about it. And that was it. That was the coup. No long drawn-out battle, no psychological warfare on the populace. The three conspirators had literally brought a couple of soldiers over, announced the Queen was no longer in power, and everyone kinda just accepted it. To replace the Queen, the Americans chose a guy named Sanford Dole to be the new leader. And that was it. After decades of being told what to do by Americans, most Native Hawaiians weren't exactly surprised that it ended like this. With even the Queen's own government consisting of more Americans than Hawaiians, the kingdom's fate was sealed. It was pointless to fight back. Hawaii had been ever so slowly beaten into submission. The only thing the Queen could do was beg the American government for help. You see, the Committee of Safety didn't exactly have the explicit permission of the American president to carry out their coup. In fact, President Grover Cleveland never had any idea what was going on until it happened. The president was actually a good friend of the Queen's. He even offered the Queen her position back if she would agree not to prosecute the people responsible for the coup. But even that was just a formality. In reality, the new president of Hawaii, Sanford Dole, made it abundantly clear that that would never happen. The American government had been checkmated by its own citizens. In the end, the American government had no choice but to recognize the new Hawaiian government. The only thing President Cleveland could do to make things even a little better was refuse to accept Hawaii as an official state. So, for the next nearly 60 years, Hawaii existed only as an independent republic and a recognized American territory under the rule of American citizens. And the sugar farmers? They got what they wanted. As an American territory, Hawaiian sugar farms could enjoy all the benefits the other American farmers got. In 1959, after nearly 60 years of Hawaiian-born Americans campaigning to be part of the United States, Hawaii was finally made the official 50th state in 1959. None of the few native Hawaiians left on the islands celebrated. In fact, in 1993, more than 12,000 Hawaiians marched in protest, asking for the return of their land and their rights. In 2015, 95% of Hawaii's land was still owned by just 82 landholders. More than half of that belongs to a state and government the people didn't choose, and the rest it's still in the hands of the sugar and pineapple companies. And if that's not enough, thousands of native Hawaiians have been waiting for more than 100 years to gain access to the 200,000 acres of land they were promised by the US Congress in 1920. This land was supposed to be given to anyone with at least 50% Hawaiian ancestry, but since the law passed, almost half of that land has actually gone to non-Hawaiians. That's the dark reality you'll never hear from tour guides in Hawaii. The people who have called Hawaii home for more than 1,000 years find themselves without land or independence, waiting for their share of 100,000 acres of land that's left for them, while American billionaires get to buy entire Hawaiian islands of the same size for their private use, and no one says a thing. Hawaii was America's first taste of overthrowing a foreign government, but it was far from its last. And every time the American government carried out a coup, a little bit of the world's history would be altered. Countries would end up ruled by dictators, thousands of people would die, and irreparable damage would be done to the global balance of power. But not one coup would become quite as important or have as serious of consequences as the Iranian coup of 1953. Under pressure from British oil executives who were about to lose their share of Iran's huge oil fields, the CIA created Operation Ajax. Using almost every underhanded tactic in the book, America was directly responsible for the overthrow of Iran's democratically elected Prime Minister, Mohammad Mossadegh. On the surface, the operation was a complete success, but no one could have ever imagined the consequences of such a coup. That one little coup, led by a few Americans on a budget of a couple of $1 million, would be the catalyst leading to some of the worst terror attacks in the world. Just about every major terror attack you can think of that would get this video demonetized if we mentioned it or showed it on screen can be traced back to this one little coup in a little-known country called Iran. And it's a piece of history that no school or university will ever teach you, which is why we've turned it into a full-length documentary showing you exactly how everything went down and how it led to the 20-plus year war on terror we have today. It's already age-restricted, so there's no chance it could have gone live on the channel, which is why we've just released the complete documentary on our private channel, which is only available to members of this channel. And all you have to do to watch it right now is click that join button below. After you join, you'll immediately get access to this documentary on the Iranian coup, along with other equally controversial ones on the Bin Laden papers, MKUltra, the CIA's mind control program, and many more to come. Channel members have been loving the documentary. People pay tens of thousands of dollars every year to universities, only to leave not knowing anything about how the world really works. But with this, you'll get all this priceless information for just $5 a month. And we promise you, it's way more entertaining than university lectures. And there's a refund policy too, unlike most YouTube memberships. So if you join and you don't think it's worth it, email us within your first month of joining, and we will personally refund you for your first month. After your first month, there is no refund. So scroll down and click that join button below right now.
Have you ever wondered why Hawaii is a part of America? I sure have, and now we know the answer. If you're new here, my name is Jake, and this is one of the biggest channels on YouTube for documentaries on money, power, war, and crime. So if you enjoyed this one, we make multiple videos just like this every single week for free. So click that subscribe button below. You have nothing to lose and everything to gain. If you use Facebook and you want shorter versions of these videos, you can follow me over there. We might be doing giveaways over there in the future. But yeah, that's gonna wrap it up. Thank you so much for watching. Stay dangerous out there, and I will see you guys in the next one.